Section 45 of Within a Budding Grove by Marcel Proust. Translated by C.K. Scott Moncrief. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kristen Hand. Seascape with Frieze of Girls, Part 12. So that if before these visits to Elster, before I had set eyes on one of his sea pictures in which a young woman in a dress of white serge or linen, on the deck of a yacht flying the American flag, had duplicated a white linen dress and colored flag in my imagination, which at once bred in me an insatiable desire to visit the spot, and see there with my own eyes white linen dresses and flags against the sea, as though no such experience had ever yet befallen me. Always until then I had taken care when I stood by the sea to expel from my field of vision, as well as the bathers in the foreground, the yachts with their too dazzling sails that were like seaside costumes. Everything that prevented me from persuading myself that I was contemplating the immemorial flood of ocean which had been moving with the same mysterious life before the appearance of the human race, and had grudged even the days of radiant sunshine which seemed to me to invest with the trivial aspect of the world's universal summer this coast of fog and tempest, to mark simply an interruption, equivalent to what in music is known as a rest. Now, on the other hand, it was the bad days that appeared to me to be some disastrous accident, a thing that could no longer find any place for itself in the world of beauty. I felt a keen desire to go out and recapture in reality what had so powerfully aroused my imagination, and I hoped that the weather would be propitious enough for me to see from the summit of the cliff the same blue shadows as were in Elster's picture. Nor, as I went along, did I still make a frame about my eyes with my hands, as in the days when, conceiving nature to be animated by a life anterior to the first appearance of man, and inconsistent with all those wearisome perfections of industrial achievement which had hitherto made me yawn with boredom at universal exhibitions or in the milliner's windows, I endeavored to include only that section of the sea over which there was no steamer passing, so that I might picture it to myself as immemorial, still contemporary with the ages in which it had been set apart from the land, or at least with the first dawn of life in Greece, which enabled me to repeat in their literal meaning the lines of Father Leconte, of which Bloch was so fond. Gone are the kings, gone are their towering prows, vanished upon the raging deep, alas, the long-haired warrior heroes of Hellas. I could no longer despise the milliners, now that Elster had told me that the delicate touches by which they gave a last refinement, a supreme caress to the ribbons or feathers of a hat after it is finished, would be as interesting to him to paint as the muscular action of the jockeys themselves, a statement which had delighted Albertine. But I must wait until I had returned, for milliners, to Paris, for regattas and races to Baalbec, where there would be no more now until next year. Even a yacht with women in white linen garments was not to be found. Often we encountered Bloch's sisters, to whom I was obliged to bow since I had dined with her father. My new friends did not know them. I am not allowed to play with Israelites, Albertine explained. Her way of pronouncing the word, Israelites, instead of Israelites, would in itself have sufficed to show, even if one had not heard the rest of the sentence, that it was no feeling of friendliness toward the chosen race that inspired these young Frenchwomen, brought up in God-fearing homes and quite ready to believe that the Jews were in the habit of massacring Christian children. Besides, they're shocking bad form, your friends, said André with a smile which implied she knew very well that they were no friends of mine. Like everything to do with the tribe, went on Albertine in the sententious tone of one who spoke from personal experience. To tell the truth, Bloch's sisters, at once overdressed and half naked, with their languishing, bold, blatant, sluttish air, did not create the best impression. And one of their cousins, who was only 15, scandalized the casino by her unconcealed admiration for Mademoiselle Leah, whose talent as an actress Monsieur Bloch Senior rated very high, but whose tastes were understood to lead her not exactly in the direction of the gentleman. Some days we took our refreshment at one of the outlying farms which catered for visitors. These were the farms known as Les Écureuils, Marie-Therese, La Croix de Hollande, Bagatelle, Californie, and Marie Antoinette. It was the last that had been adopted by the little band. But at other times, instead of going to a farm, we would climb to the highest point of the cliff, and when we had reached it and were sitting on the grass, would undo our parcel of sandwiches and cakes. My friends preferred the sandwiches, and were surprised to see me eat only a single chocolate cake, sugared with Gothic tracery, or an apricot tart. This was because, with sandwiches of cheese or of green stuff, a form of food that was novel to me and knew nothing of the past, I had nothing in common. But the cakes understood. The tarts were gossips. There were in the former an insipid taste of cream, in the latter a fresh taste of fruit, which knew all about Combray and about Gilbert, not only the Gilbert of Combray, but her too of Paris, at whose tea parties I had found them again. They reminded me of those cake plates of the Arabian Nights pattern, the subjects on which were such a distraction to my Aunt Leonie, when Francois brought her up one day, Aladdin or the Wonderful Lamp, another day Ali Baba or the Sleeper Awakes, or Sinbad the Sailor embarking at Bassorah with all his treasure. I should dearly have liked to see them again, but my grandmother did not know what had become of them, and thought moreover that they were just common plates that had been bought in the village. No matter. In that grey Midland Combray scene they and their pictures were set like many-coloured jewels, as in the dark church were the windows with their shifting radiance, as in the dusk of my bedroom were the projections cast by the magic lantern, as in the foreground of the view of the railway station and the little local line the buttercups from the Indies and the Persian lilacs, as were my great-aunt's shelves of old porcelain in the sombre dwelling of an elderly lady in a country town. Stretched out on the cliff, I would see before me nothing but grassy meadows, and beyond them not the seven heavens of the Christian cosmogony, but two stages only, one of a deeper blue, the sea, and over it another more pale. We ate our food, and if I had brought with me also some little keepsake which might appeal to one or other of my friends, joy sprang with such sudden violence into her translucent face, flushed in an instant, that her lips had not the strength to hold it in, and to allow it to escape parted in a shout of laughter. They had gathered close round me, and between their faces, which were almost touching one another, the air that separated them traced azure pathways, such as might have been cut by a gardener wishing to clear the ground a little so as to be able himself to move freely through a thicket of roses. When we had finished eating, we would play games which until then I should have thought boring, sometimes such childish games as King of the Castle, or Who Laughs First. Not for a kingdom would I have renounced them now. The rosy dawn of adolescence, with which the faces of these girls were still aglow, and from which I, young as I was, had already emerged, shed its light on everything round about them, and like the fluid painting of some of the primitives, brought out the most insignificant details of their daily lives in relief against a golden background. Even the faces of the girls were, for the most part, clouded with this misty effulgence of a dawn, from which their actual features had not yet emerged. One saw only a charming sheet of color, beneath which what in a few years' time would be a profile was not discernible. The profile of today had nothing definite about it, and could be only a momentary resemblance to some deceased member of the family to whom nature had paid this commemorative courtesy. It comes so soon, the moment when there is nothing left to wait for, when the body is fixed in an immobility which holds no fresh surprise in store, when one loses all hope on seeing, as on a tree in the height of summer, leaves already brown, round a face still young hair that is growing thin or turning gray. It is so short, that radiant morning time that one comes to like only the very youngest girls, those in whom the flesh, like a precious leaven, is still at work. They are no more yet than a stream of ductile matter, molded ever afresh by the fleeting impression of the moment. You would say that each of them was in turn a little statuette of childish gaiety, of a child grown earnest, coaxing, surprised, taking its pattern from an expression frank and complete, but fugitive. This plasticity gives a wealth of variety and charm to the pretty attentions which a little girl pays to us. Of course, such attentions are indispensable in the woman also, and she whom we do not attract, or who fails to let us see that we have attracted her, tends to assume in our eyes a somewhat tedious uniformity. But even these pretty attentions, after a certain age, cease to send gentle ripples over a face which the struggle for existence has hardened, has rendered unalterably militant or ecstatic. One, owing to the prolonged strain of the obedience that subjects wife to husband, will seem not so much a woman's face as a soldier's. Another, carved by the sacrifices which a mother has consented to make day after day for her children, will be the face of an apostle. A third is, after a stormy passage through the years, the face of an ancient mariner, upon a body of which its garments alone indicate the sex. Certainly the attentions that a woman pays us can still, so long as we are in love with her, scatter fresh charms over the hours that we spend in her company. But she is not then for us a series of different women. Her gaiety remains external to an unchanging face. Whereas adolescence is anterior to this complete solidification, and from this it follows that we feel, in the company of young girls, the refreshing sense that is afforded us by the spectacle of forms undergoing an incessant process of change, a play of unstable forces which makes us think of that perpetual recreation of the primordial elements of nature which we contemplate when we stand by the sea. It was not merely a social engagement, a drive with Madame de Villeparis's that I would have sacrificed to the ferret or guessing games of my friends. More than once, Robert de Saint Loup had sent word that since I was not coming to see him at Doncier's, he had applied for 24 hours leave, which he would come spend at Balbec. Each time I wrote back that he was on no account to come, offering the excuse that I should be obliged to be away myself that very day, when I had some duty call to pay with my grandmother on family friends in the neighborhood. No doubt I fell in his estimation when he learned from his aunt in what the duty call consisted, and who the persons were who combined to play the part of my grandmother. And yet I had not been wrong, perhaps, after all, in sacrificing not only the vain pleasures of the world, but the real pleasure of friendship to that of spending the whole day in this green garden. People who enjoy the capacity, it is true that such people are artists, and I had long been convinced that I should never be that, are also under an obligation to live for themselves. And friendship is a dispensation from this duty, an abdication of self. Even conversation, which is the mode of expression of friendship, is a superficial digression which gives us no new acquisition. We may talk for a lifetime without doing more than indefinitely repeat the vacuity of a minute, whereas the march of thought in the solitary travail of artistic creation proceeds downwards, into the depths, in the only direction that is not closed to us, along which we are free to advance, though with more effort, it is true, towards a goal of truth. And friendship is not merely devoid of virtue like conversation, it is fatal to us as well. For the sense of boredom which it is impossible not to feel in a friend's company, when, that is to say, we must remain exposed on the surface of our consciousness, instead of pursuing our voyage of discovery into the depths. For those of us in whom the law of development is purely internal, that first impression of boredom, our friendship impels us to correct when we are alone again, to recall with emotion the words uttered by our friend, to look upon them as a valuable addition to our substance, albeit we are not like buildings to which stones can be added from without, but like trees which draw from their own sap the knot that duly appears on their trunks, the spreading roof of their foliage. I was lying to myself. I was interrupting the process of growth in that direction in which I could indeed really be enlarged and made happy, when I congratulated myself on being liked, admired by so good, so clever, so rare a creature as Saint Loup, when I focused my mind not upon my own obscure impressions which duty bade me unravel, but on the words uttered by my friend, in which, when I repeated them to myself, when I had them repeated to me by that other self who dwells in us, and on whom we are always so ready to transfer the burden of taking thought, I strove to make myself find a beauty very different from that which I used to peruse in silence when I was really alone, but one that would enhance the merit of Robert, of myself, of my life. In the life which a friend like this provided for me, I seemed to myself to be comfortably preserved from solitude, nobly desirous of sacrificing myself for him, in fact quite incapable of realizing myself. Among the girls, on the other hand, if the pleasure which I enjoyed was selfish, at least it was not based on the lie which seeks to make us believe that we are not irremediably alone, and which, when we talk to another person, prevents us from admitting that it is no longer we who speak, that we are fashioning ourselves in the likeness of strangers and not of our own ego, which is quite different from them. The words that passed between the girls of the little band and myself were not of any interest. They were, moreover, but few, broken by long spells of silence on my part. All of which did not prevent me from finding, in listening to them when they spoke to me, as much pleasure as in gazing at them, in discovering in the voice of each one of them a brightly colored picture. It was with ecstasy that I caught their pipings. Love helps us to discern things, to discriminate. Standing in a wood, the lover of birds at once distinguishes the notes of the different species, which to ordinary people sound the same. The lover of girls knows that human voices vary even more. Each one possesses more notes than the richest instrument of music, and the combinations in which the voice groups those notes are as inexhaustible as the infinite variety of personalities. When I talked with any one of my friends, I was conscious that the original, the unique portrait of her individuality had been skillfully traced, tyrannically imposed on my mind as much by the inflections of her voice as by those of her face, and that these were two separate spectacles which rendered, each in its own plane, the same single reality. No doubt the lines of the voice, like those of the face, were not yet definitely fixed. The voice still had to break, and the face to change. Just as children have a gland, the secretion in which enables them to digest milk, a gland which is not found in grown men and women, so there were in the twitterings of these girls notes which women's voices no longer contain. And on this instrument with its greater compass they played with their lips, showing all the application, the ardor of Bellini's little angel musicians, qualities which also are an exclusive appanage of youth. Later on, these girls would lose that note of enthusiastic conviction which gave a charm to their simplest utterances. Whether it were Albertine, who in a tone of authority repeated puns to which the younger ones listened with admiration, until that wild impulse to laugh caught them all with the irresistible violence of a sneeze, or André, who began to speak of their work in the schoolroom, work even more childish, seemingly, than the games they played, with a gravity essentially puerile, and their words changed in tone, like the lyrics of ancient times when poetry, still hardly differentiated from music, was declaimed upon the different notes of a scale. In spite of which, the girls' voices already gave a quite clear indication of the attitude that each of these little people had adopted towards life, an attitude so personal that it would be speaking in far too general terms to say of one, she treats everything as a joke, of another, she jumps from assertion to assertion, of a third, she lives in a state of expectant hesitation. The features of our face are hardly more than gestures which force of habit has made permanent. Nature, like the destruction of Pompeii, like the metamorphosis of a nymph into a tree, has arrested us in an accustomed movement. Similarly, our intonations embody our philosophy of life, what a person says to himself about things at any given moment. No doubt these peculiarities were to be found not only in the girls. They were those of their parents. The individual is a part of something that is more generally diffused than himself. By this reckoning, our parents furnish us not only with those habitual gestures which are the outlines of our face and voice, but also with certain mannerisms in speech, certain favorite expressions, which almost as unconscious as an intonation, almost as profound, indicate likewise a definite point of view towards life. It is quite true, since we are speaking of girls, that there are certain of these expressions which their parents do not hand on to them until they have reached a certain age, as a rule not before they are women. These are kept in reserve. Thus, for instance, if you were to speak of the pictures of one of Elster's friends, André, whose hair was still down, could not make use, personally, of the expression which her mother and elder sister employed. It appears the man is quite charming. But that would come in due course, when she was allowed to go to the Palais Royal. And already, since her first communion, Albertine had begun to say, like a friend of her aunt, "I'm sure I should find that simply terrible." She had also had given to her, as a little present, the habit of repeating whatever you had just been saying to her, so as to appear to be interested, and to be trying to form an opinion of her own. If you said that an artist's work was good, or his house nice, "Oh, his work is good, is it? Oh, his house is nice, is it?" Last of all, and even more general than the family heritage, was the rich layer imposed by the native province from which they derived their voices, and of which indeed their intonations smacked. When André sharply struck a solemn note, she could not prevent the Perigordian string of her vocal instrument from giving back a resonant sound quite in harmony, moreover, with the meridional purity of her features. While to the incessant pranks of Rosamond, the substance of her north country face and voice responded, whatever her mood at the time, in the accent of their province. Between that province and the temperament of the little girl who dictated these inflections, I caught a charming dialogue. A dialogue not in any sense a discord. It would not have been possible to separate the girl herself and her native place. She was herself. She was still it also. Moreover, this reaction of locally procured materials on the genius who utilizes them, and to whose work their reaction imparts an added freshness, does not make the work any less individual, and whether it be that of an architect, a cabinet maker, or a composer, it reflects no less minutely the most subtle shades of the artist's personality. Because he has been compelled to work in the millstone of Senlis or the red sandstone of Strasbourg, has respected the knots peculiar to the ash tree, has borne in mind when writing his score the resources, the limitations, the volume of sound, the possibilities of flute or alto voice. All this I realized, and yet we talked so little. Whereas with Madame de Villaparisis or Saint Loup I should have displayed by my words a great deal more pleasure than I should actually have felt, for I used always to be worn out when I parted from them. When, on the other hand, I was lying on the grass among all these girls, the plenitude of what I was feeling infinitely outweighed the paucity, the infrequency of our speech, and brimmed over from my immobility and silence in floods of happiness, the waves of which rippled up to die at the feet of these young roses. For a convalescent who rests all day long in a flower garden or orchard, a scent of flowers or fruit does not more completely pervade the thousand trifles that compose his idle hours than did for me that color, that fragrance in search of which my eyes kept straying towards the girls, and the sweetness of which finally became incorporated in me. So it is that grapes grow sugary in sunshine, and by their slow continuity these simple little games had gradually wrought in me also, as in those who do nothing else all day but lie outstretched by the sea, breathing the salt air and growing sunburned, a relaxation, a blissful smile, a vague sense of dizziness that had spread from brain to eyes. Now and then a pretty attention from one or other of them would stir in me vibrations which dissipated for a time my desire for the rest. Thus, one day Albertine had suddenly asked, "Who has a pencil?" André had provided one, Rosamond the paper. Albertine had warned them, "Now, young ladies, you are not to look at what I write." After carefully tracing each letter, supporting the paper on her knees, she had passed it to me with, "Take care no one sees." Whereupon I had unfolded it and read her message, which was, "I love you." "But we mustn't sit here scribbling nonsense," she cried, turning impetuously, with a sudden gravity of demeanor, to André and Rosamond. "I ought to show you the letter I got from Giselle this morning. What an idiot I am! I've had it all this time in my pocket, and you can't think how important it may be to us." Giselle had been moved to copy out for her friend, so that it might be passed on to the others, the essay which she had written in her certificate examination. Albertine's fears as to the difficulty of the subject set had been more than justified by the two from which Giselle had had to choose. The first was Sophocles from the Shades writes to Racine to console him for the failure of Athalie. The other, suppose that after the first performance of Esther, Madame de Sévigné is writing to Madame de Lafayette to tell her how much she regretted her absence. Now Giselle, in an excess of zeal which ought to have touched the examiner's heart, had chosen the former, which was also the more difficult of the two subjects, and had handled it with such remarkable skill that she had been given 14 marks and had been congratulated by the board. She would have received mention if she had not dried up in the Spanish paper. The essay, a copy of which Giselle had now sent her, was immediately read aloud to us by Albertine, for having presently to pass the same examination, she was anxious to have an opinion from André, who was by far the cleverest of them all and might be able to give her some good tips. "She did have a bit of luck," was Albertine's comment. "It's the very subject her French mistress made her swat up while she was here." The letter from Sophocles to Racine, as drafted by Giselle, ran as follows: "My dear friend, you must pardon me the liberty of addressing you when I have not the honor of your personal acquaintance, but your latest tragedy, Athalie, shows, does it not, that you have made the most thorough study of my own modest works. You have not only put poetry in the mouths of the protagonists, or principal persons of the drama, but you have written other, and let me tell you without flattery, charming verses for the choruses, a feature which was not too bad, according to all one hears, in Greek tragedy, but is a complete novelty in France. Nay, more, your talent, always so fluent, so finished, so winning, so fine, so delicate, has here acquired an energy on which I congratulate you. Athalie, Joad, these are figures which your rival Corneille could have wrought no better. The characters are virile, the plot simple and strong. You have given us a tragedy in love which is not the keynote, and on this I must offer you my sincerest compliments. The most familiar proverbs are not always the truest. I will give you an example. This passion treat, which makes the poet's art fly as on wings straight to the listener's heart. You have shown us that the religious sentiment in which your choruses are steeped is no less capable of moving us. The general public may have been puzzled at first, but those who are best qualified to judge must give you your due. I have felt myself impelled to offer you all my congratulations, to which I would add, my dear brother poet, an expression of my very highest esteem." Albertine's eyes, while she was reading this to us, had not ceased to sparkle. "Really, you'd think she must have cribbed it somewhere," she exclaimed, as she reached the end. "I should never have believed that Giselle could hatch out anything like as good. And the poetry she brings in, where on earth can she have got that from?" Albertine's admiration, with a change, it is true, of object, but with no loss and increase, rather of intensity, combined with the closest attention to what was being said, continued to make her eyes start from her head, all the time that André, consulted as being the biggest of the band and more knowledgeable than the others, first of all spoke of Giselle's essay with a certain irony, then, with a levity of tone which failed to conceal her underlying seriousness, proceeded to reconstruct the letter in her own way. "It is not badly done," she told Albertine, "but if I were you and had the same subject set me, which is quite likely, as they do very often set that, I shouldn't do it in that way. This is how I would tackle it. Well, first of all, if I had been Giselle, I should not have let myself get tied up. I should have begun by making a rough sketch of what I was going to write on a separate piece of paper. On the top line I should state the question and give an account of the subject, then the general ideas to be worked into the development. After that, appreciation, style, conclusion. In that way, with a summary to refer to, you know where you are. But at the very start, where she begins her account of the subject, or if you like, to teen, since it's a letter we're speaking of, where she comes to the matter, Giselle has gone off the rails together. Writing to a person of the 17th century, Sophocles ought never to have said, 'My dear friend.'" "Why, of course she ought to have said, 'My dear Racine,'" came impetuously from Albertine. "That would have been much better." "No," replied André, with a trace of mockery in her tone, "she ought to have put 'Sir.' In the same way, to end up, she ought to have thought of something like, 'Suffer me, sir,' at the very most, 'Dear sir,' to inform you of the sense of high esteem with which I have the honor to be your servant." Then again, Giselle says that the choruses in Athalie are a novelty. She is forgetting Esther and two tragedies that are not much read now, but happen to have been analyzed this year by the professor himself, so that you need only mention them since he's got them on the brain, and you are bound to pass. I mean Les Juifs by Robert Garnier and Mon Chrétien l'Allemand. André quoted these titles without managing quite to conceal a secret sense of benevolent superiority, which found expression in a smile, quite a delightful smile, for that matter. Albertine could contain herself no longer. "André, you really are a perfect marvel," she cried. "You must write down those names for me. Just fancy, what luck would it be if I got on to that, even in the oral? I should bring them in at once and make a colossal impression." But in the days that followed, every time Albertine begged André just to tell her again the names of those two plays so that she might write them down, her blue-stocking friend seemed most unfortunately to have forgotten them and left her none the wiser. "And another thing," André went on, with the faintest note in her voice of scorn for companions so much younger than herself, though she relished their admiration and attached to the manner in which she herself would have composed the essay a greater importance than she wanted us to think. "Sophocles in the Shades must be kept well informed of all that goes on. He must know, therefore, that it was not before the general public, but before the king's majesty and a few privileged courtiers, that Athalie was first played. What Giselle says in this connection of the esteem of qualified judges is not at all bad, but she might have gone a little farther. Sophocles, now that he is immortal, might quite well have the gift of prophecy and announce that, according to Voltaire, Athalie is to be the supreme achievement not of Racine merely, but of the human mind." Albertine was drinking in every word. Her eyes blazed, and it was with the utmost indignation that she rejected Rosamond's suggestion that they should begin to play. "And so," André concluded in the same easy, detached tone, blending a faint sneer with a certain warmth of conviction, "if Giselle had noted down properly, first of all, the general idea she was going to develop, it might perhaps have occurred to her to do what I myself should have done, point out what a difference there is between the religious inspiration of Sophocles' choruses and Racine's. I should have made Sophocles remark that if Racine's choruses are instinct with religious feeling like those of the Greek tragedians, the gods are not the same. The god of Jode has nothing in common with the god of Sophocles, and that brings us quite naturally, when we have finished developing the subject, to our conclusion. What does it matter if their beliefs are different? Sophocles would hesitate to insist upon such a point. He would be afraid of wounding Racine's convictions, and so, slipping in a few appropriate words on his masters at Port Royal, he prefers to congratulate his disciple on the loftiness of his poetic genius. Admiration and attention had so heated Albertine that great drops were rolling down her cheeks. André preserved the unruffled calm of a female dandy. It would not be a bad thing either to quote some of the opinions of famous critics, she added, before they began their game. Yes, put in Albertine, so I've been told. The best ones to quote on the whole are Sainte-Beuve and Merlet, aren't they? Well, you're not absolutely wrong, André told her. Merlet and Sainte-Beuve are by no means bad, but you certainly ought to mention Deltour and Gasque de Fosse. She refused, however, despite Albertine's entreaties, to write down these two unfamiliar names. Meanwhile, I had been thinking of the little page torn from a scribbling block which Albertine had handed me. I love you, she had written, and an hour later, as I scrambled down the paths which led back, a little too vertically for my liking, to Baalbec, I said to myself that it was with her that I would have my romance. End of section 45.